My name's Stuart Casey-Maslen, and I'm the mine action editor for the Landmine Monitor, working for Norwegian People's Aid.
Thanks for joining us. Could you tell us which countries are affected by mines or explosive remnants of war?
Well, we have sadly quite a long list. We've calculated that there are 70 nations around the world and some territories not internationally recognized that are contaminated either with landmines or explosive remnants of war, including, of course, explosive submunitions, which have remained unexploded. So that's down from a decade ago. We've managed to wipe off about 10 countries from that list, but it's still a very big problem that we need to deal with.
Once a state joins the Mine Ban Treaty, what are its obligations in terms of mine clearance?
Well, a state that joins the Mine Ban Treaty has 10 years from becoming a party to the treaty to complete clearance of mined areas under its jurisdiction or control. And the first of these clearance deadlines elapsed on the 1st of March. Sadly, 15 states parties were not able to meet that deadline and had to request an extension. But that number, 15 states parties, is far, far higher than we would have liked and far higher than should have been the case.
Can you tell us about recent progress in terms of mine clearance in states parties?
Recently, Malawi's been taken off the list of those that still have to complete their clearance obligations. Swaziland has been taken off the list. France has cleared one of its ammunition stores located in Djibouti. That was an obligation under the Mine Ban Treaty. So those three have occurred within the last 12 months.
You mentioned 15 states parties have been unable to meet their clearance obligations. What reasons have been given for this delay?
Resources is one issue. Difficulties of terrain, climate was often raised. For example, the border between Peru and Ecuador, which is the main obstacle to those two countries completing their clearance, is very difficult terrain, and we understand that. However, the clearance operations have not been as fast, has not been as efficient as they could have been. Other countries like the UK and Venezuela, it's quite simply lack of political will that has prevented clearance operations. That is unacceptable, and we hope that both those countries will very soon be initiating clearance operations.
What are the different ways in which contaminated land can be released and made safe for the public?
Clearance is one way of releasing land to the civilian population. There are two other main ways of releasing land. One is what we call non-technical survey. That's a survey by talking to people but not using clearance assets on the suspected area. And much land can be released safely by non-technical survey. If there's good evidence that there is or may be contamination, this is where technical survey comes in. This means that you send in lanes, you find the outer perimeters of the mined area, and then you focus your clearance assets. What that means is that we're more efficient in identifying really hazardous land and then in releasing it safely.
What area does the Landmine Monitor Report 2008 estimate has been cleared of mines and explosive remnants of war in the year 2007?
Clearance in 2007 was on a par, if not greater, than that the previous year. What we've calculated, and these figures are on the side of caution, is that 122 square kilometers of mined areas were cleared and more than 400 square kilometers of battle areas were cleared. By battle areas, we mean areas where there is no mine contamination. It's unexploded ordnance following combat. It's quicker and it's less challenging to do battle area clearance, so that's why those figures are greater. The figure was almost certainly higher for 2007 than we were able to report. Very substantial clearance was reported by Morocco and by Iran, but we were not in a position to verify the quality of that clearance, so they've not been included in the figures.
So those clearance figures were in terms of area cleared. Can you give an estimate in terms of the number of weapons that have been destroyed in 2007?
Well, we've seen tens of thousands of explosive submunitions that were destroyed, similar numbers of landmines. But I would stress that because you destroy a large number, it doesn't necessarily mean that your clearance is being effective. What's most important is that you focus clearance on areas that are needed by the civilian population for agriculture, for community infrastructure, clearance of roads, etc. The focus should be on clearing the right kind of land as quickly as possible, and not necessarily on the quantities of ordnance that you're destroying, or even necessarily the amount of land that you're releasing. It's what that land's going to be used for that's most important.
Did any new contamination take place in 2007?
There are certain countries where mines are still being laid. We have about 9 countries in 2007 where non-state actors were laying new mines. Some of these, like Mali, have been mined for the first time. Reports of contamination in the Gambia as well, new contamination in places like the Philippines. Happily, the scale of the mine laying that we're seeing is nothing like that which occurred a decade ago. It's still extremely unwelcome, it still has to be cleared, but luckily we're not seeing the massive contamination that occurred in the 80s and 90s in places like Angola, Afghanistan, and Cambodia.
Currently, how much land worldwide is contaminated by mines and explosive remnants of war?
Well, there's no one that can give you a precise figure of exactly how much land is contaminated. What we can say is that the figures that were suggested in the last decade of 100 million mines and tens of thousands of square kilometers have been exaggerated. The problem is not that big. That doesn't mean it's not significant. It is extremely significant. But we've calculated that we're looking at a problem of mines that is in the hundreds or thousands of square kilometers, but not the tens of thousands.
How many mines are currently held in stockpiles the world over?
Again, nobody knows the exact figure. It's over 100 million, which is a massive figure. Most of those mines are within Chinese stockpiles, but you also have India, Pakistan, the United States, and the Russian Federation that have very significant stockpiles. Those countries, of course, remain outside the Mine Ban Treaty currently. At least we're not seeing them, with the exception of the Russian Federation, we're not seeing them use these stockpiles. But what we'd like to see is them destroyed. In terms of those countries within the Mine Ban Treaty, 42 million stockpiled anti-personnel mines have been destroyed since the treaty came into force. That's a massive number and a very encouraging achievement. But we have to make sure that those stockpiles that are outside are dealt with within the next few years.
For countries that have ratified the Mine Ban Treaty and complied with all the obligations, is their work done?
Well, they've certainly received our congratulations. It means that people will not be falling victim to these weapons in the future. It also means that they have a role to play in passing on the lessons that they've learned. We've all been learning in the mine action community over the last decade or so, and we're still learning. And it's important that those lessons get passed on to everyone as soon as possible. One of the key ones, of course, is the process of land release that is gathering speed. We know that some surveys in the past were not good at identifying the precise nature and extent of the problem. They exaggerated how many areas were affected and how much land was contaminated. What land release processes allow you to do is to release land as safely as possible, much more quickly, without spending valuable, precious clearance resources on area that has no contamination. We still clear land far too often that has no mines, that has no explosive remnants of war on it. And that means we're wasting precious resources. I think that's one of the big lessons that we've learned, and hopefully more and more states, whether they're inside or outside the Mine Ban Treaty, will be using land release as a way to speed up the release of land to the civilian population.
What are the major developments in terms of landmines and explosive remnants of war?
We have a very good new treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions. It's not yet in force, but it's already setting the standard for clearance of countries affected by cluster munition remnants. And this convention will provide us an opportunity to not only learn the lessons from the last 10, 15 years of demining, but also put them into practice.